Employers and managers who had to fire their best employee. What happened? Story 1 had a guy who would work his off daily inputting data into spreadsheets, would come in, put in solid hours of actual work, not goofing off. He would literally get 4 times as much stuff done a week as anyone else in the office. After 3 weeks straight of this, other people started to take notice and occasionally ask him to help them out when they're behind, and he obliges. This gets worse and worse. And eventually people are basically just walking all over him while they spend all day Facebooking and whatnot because he won't say no if they ask him to help with their work. The dude just keeps trucking through, though. About 4 months into working there, it's kind of the point where you can hear the extra girls talking about leaving early and not getting in trouble because he will just do all the work for us if we ask anyway. Well, the guy goes into the boss's office, and I work right next to it, so I can hear more or less the entire conversation. I am paraphrasing, but it went something like this. I would like a raise. I am doing way too much work for how much I'm getting paid. Everyone else who works here is so lazy. I even have people making jokes about how I will do their work for them and they will get paid for it. Well, name, I can sympathize with you, but you have to understand, I can't just give you a raise. If I give you a raise, I would have to explain to everyone why you got a raise, and they didn't. You could tell them it's because I am doing half of their work for them while they look at stupid memes. I'm sorry, name. It just wouldn't work out well. Well, then, is there any positions available above mine that I could apply for a promotion to? I don't think we can really look into a promotion this early into you working here. We would need time to properly evaluate your work ethic. Seriously? You seriously just said that to me? You're not going to break my back doing an entire office's work for a company that doesn't give 2 shits about me. You and this entire office can go themselves. He walks out of the office fuming mad and yells, "Hey everyone, boss just denied my raise. So no more leaving work early for any of you lazy heads, because I quit." It was like a scene from Office Space, only in real life. Story 2, we hire a lot of people in recovery who are a part of the drug court program under the condition that they will be terminated if they go back to jail for drug alcohol charges. This coworker was our hardest worker and always picked up shifts and got tons of compliments. So it really sucked when she relapsed and failed her P-test with drug court. She got sent to jail for a week and we had to fire her. I still kept in touch with her. And when I found out she was pregnant, I convinced my boss to hire her back. One last chance. I'm so happy I wasn't wrong, because she's about to celebrate her 4th year of sobriety, and she's now management. Story 3 had a great waiter. Robert could run circles around the entire staff. He knew the kitchen as well, could jump in at prep and assist if we got backed up and still tend his tables, put a 3-bottle of white Zinfandel in his backpack, right in front of a security camera, and while the owner was sitting at the bar eating. He was a student and working part-time. He had to be bringing in $300 to $500 in cash a week. Obligatory, not me, but coworker I had joined the company a few months prior, was still getting to know the various details of my job. And this guy was the star of the company. I spent as much time working with him as I could honestly. He was the star. He was a solid programmer, great project manager, awesome account and customer management skills. And he had a knack for thinking outside the box on creative solutions. He loved working there, had rejected offers from Google, Facebook, and Pinterest that I know of. And then the director's 16-year-old daughter, age of consent, is 16 here. He was 31. Welp. Story 4, he was one of my best weekend workers, dependable, always on time, really good at his job. I got a call from my management on a July 4th saying, "We're going to need to find a replacement for name." I say, "Why?" "Did he find a better job?" My management, "No, he was arrested for murder last night." So let's just say I didn't have the chance to fire him. I was dumbfounded when I got that call at one story time. So the story behind it is, a friend of the victim was worried when the victim wasn't answering calls, texts. She got in touch with the landlord of the facility expressing her concerns. They enter the apartment and find her face down in the bathroom with her wrists duct taped and duct tape around her mouth and nose. She was already dead by the time they got to her. The place had been rummaged through. Well, my employee lived right above her, and just by asking him simple questions about it, the police became suspicious of him, obtained a search warrant for his apartment. They found some of her clothing along with a missing money jar of hers as well as duct tape. He was arrested that night in front of a camera crew, in his work uniform of all things. Now he is sentenced for the crime and is on suicide watch in jail. The shame is he killed a woman who had terminal cancer. Edit to it never came out what his motive was behind it. Probably the money jar they found in his apartment. Story 5, not me, but I was working in retail, and one of the customer service guys was being groomed for management. Had been there for a while, was trusted to count money, and with the safe combination, opened if managers couldn't, ECT. He was a cool black guy's race is important to the story, but a bit cocky and arrogant. My cousin also worked there, who was also cocky and arrogant. Anyway, my cousin put in his 2 weeks, but wasn't being a bad employee. My cousin didn't like the soon-to-be manager because they were pretty similar in a lot of ways, and they clashed because of it. On my cousin's last week, Unprovoked, he approaches the guy and says, "You look like a big black." The guy walks up to my cousin, puts his finger to his head, and says, "Do you have a problem with me?" It ended there with my cousin walking away, then reporting he was threatened because a finger made contact. The guy was fired. My cousin was and didn't regret it and laughed about it with my other friends, who were also dicks. Story 6 obligatory happened to a coworker working at a bank. My branch had the biggest superstar in the state, always crushing sales numbers. He generated more revenue than the rest of the branch combined. He set up a really big business account presentation, but his mother died literally on the day he was supposed to give the talk. Branch manager stepped in, held the presentation. The guy had built everything up. It was essentially a done deal. Branch manager just had to get a signature on the paperwork. Obviously feeling bad for him, thinking he deserved the credit, they booked the deal under his name the next day. Technically, to get credit for a deal, you have to be there at signing. Both were fired within a week for sales manipulation. Story 7, he was our fastest forklift operator. Guy could get a truck loaded in 7 to 15 minutes, but he started developing a shitty attitude, and we just couldn't work with him. The new operators we have take 30 to 45 minutes to get a truck loaded, and they're legitimately a little dumb and have a hard time reading. I don't know if it was worth it. Story 8, work in retail. One of the staff from checkouts was amazing and would come up and help in our cafe constantly. She was fast, friendly with customers, and we would get so many compliments, and we asked if we could have her up here permanently. She stole a pen. Security had her on camera. Fired immediately. Edit pen was a fancy pen, packaged on shelf to be sold. She was right under the security camera stealing it. Security saw, told higher management, and I don't really think stealing, regardless what of, can just be ignored. I believe they probably did it to scare employees like this is what happens if you steal. Story 9, I wasn't the manager, but we had a supervisor who was a rising star in the company, turned a struggling operation into one that was running well under budget and was generally easy to work with. We also had a mechanic who was a lazy sack of, and nobody could ever find him. So one day the operations manager was looking at the security footage, try to figure out what the mechanic was doing so day, and caught him selling pills out of his truck in the parking lot. So he called the police. When the police showed up, the mechanic was in his truck in the middle of selling drugs to the supervisor. They were both fired. The operation went from under budget to being $50,000 to $100,000 over for the next few months. Story 10, top manager for retail job. I worked at lost her keys to the store that also had the keys to all the registers on the key ring. The registers started going short or would be empty aside from the change and dollar bills in the drawer. This went on for months. Corporate found out after installing a new set of security cameras overnight without her knowledge. She enlisted a group of sales associates to do most of the dirty work, but they found out she was the ringleader when they found out all the sales associates would bring her the stolen money, and she would dole it out after taking her cut. Story 11, super talkative girl, really annoying, but was great on the phone. She caught on faster than anyone else at the job. The trainers were pretty impressed, and there was a lot of kissing on their end. By the first month she's been there, she was already in the top 5 for sales. The problem was that she was a giant racist. She would have been totally fine if she kept her neo-Nazi lifestyle quiet, but she got in a mindset of they want fire me, in the best they have at sales, so she got comfortable and let the causal and not-so-causal racism flow. It didn't help that the guy who sat next to her was a black guy from Spain, and the girl behind her was Mexican. Story 12, my dad had a guy working for him who was great, could work long hours, not complaining about being on call, etc. Well, he got caught a nurse in his office, he got divorced, and had a nervous breakdown and started threatening to kill everyone. So they had to fire him and have him banned from the premises. Oh, and after that we caught him hiding in the woods behind our house. Crazy guy. Oh, and he sued us for wrongful termination. Really dedicated guy. Edit, these guys were doctors who worked in the ER. He did get settlement, and the nurse sued him and the hospital for harassment, and got a few cookies too. Funny thing is how common affairs are in hospitals. This idiot couldn't handle it. Story 13, Scott was my riding buddy. We rode together everywhere on our motorcycles. I managed a small restaurant, a small chain. Only 2 shops, but it was growing. When a night manager position opened, I gave it to him. He worked hard and was enthusiastic. A couple years passed, now 5 locations. I was general manager, and Scott managed the original location. We still rode everywhere, swapped girlfriends, played pool. Life was good. Scott began to miss rides we had planned because he was working. He really was a hard worker, tireless energy. I soon noticed he was working so hard because he was understaffed. His employee turnover rate was high. I initially thought it was because of the young employees that typically applied at that location, but there was more to it. I started spending more time around him and noticed he was, when he thought I wasn't looking, a tyrant boss to the kids that worked there. Kids left, and he covered it up by working more himself. Overworked, he became exhausted, and an even worse boss. I gave him some time off, sent in experienced employees, worked with him on training and communication. I thought he was absorbing it, but I got reports back that he was worse than ever. I sat and talked with him, a serious job-threatening talk. He argued, said it was under control. I took his keys and handed him a box of his belongings. This is long ago, early 80s, as the recession wound down. I was able to find a better gig more suited to my skills and education. I heard from him a couple times, usually looking for something, a fake recent reference, co-sign for a loan, etc. I don't do that for anybody. Last year I got a sad call from him, saying he wished we had stayed in touch. We both still rode. Actually, he didn't still ride. He was calling from his deathbed, as cancer ate the last of him away. I have always felt that it was my hiring him to a position he wasn't really ready for that started him down the road from being an enthusiastic, bright-eyed kid full of hope and integrity to the sad, narcissistic bill collector he became. TLDR wrecked my friend's life, edit OK. I don't actually blame myself for the arc of his life. We each are responsible for our own choices. It's just that I can't help but feel that I missed something, some opportunity to steer him in a happier direction. Story 14. Part of my job is to process expense reports from the sales department. I noticed one month that the top salesman had claimed a plane ticket expense twice. Once when he booked it, and then again when he took the flight months later. I reviewed his past expenses and noticed he was doing this regularly. When he booked the flight originally, he would claim the full amount of the ticket. Then when he used the flight, he would claim each leg of the trip as a separate daily expense so that the receipt amounts wouldn't match, so as to avoid detection. This is how I figured out he was doing it intentionally. I showed the evidence to the CFO, and he was gone the next week. I only went back 3 years, but he stole about $10,000 over those 3 years. Story 15. Best by Manager. Had a guy in Geek Squad who was a great salesperson, probably top 10 in the district. He had an incident during a data transfer where he accidentally transferred another client's information to the external drive. The customer flipped out, and unfortunately, due to company policy, we had to let him go. Fortunately, he knew it was going to happen, but it was just a matter of time. Story 16. I managed a coffee shop fakery. My best employee was this kid named Alexis. He was sharp and was quick to pick up on all the skills required to work in our fast-paced environment. But he was also someone who would stay out really late at night partying, and it would affect his attendance. One night in particular, he calls me up and tells me he's stuck in Baltimore. We live in D.C. and won't be able to make it in for his shift the following morning. He called me at 7 p.m. The last Mark commuter train leaves at 9:30 or so, and there's a free circulator that runs throughout the city. I used to visit Baltimore pretty regularly at the time because there was a girl I was seeing from up there. Anyways, I only had 1 day off a week and was working 14-hour days. It was the last straw in a series of no-call, no-show situations where he had left me hanging for our busiest days. I called his phone that same night and told him that if he didn't show up for his shift on time the following morning, he was fired. He didn't show up, and I never saw him again. This was a few years ago, but I sometimes wonder what happened to him. He was a really sharp kid, but he did way too many drugs and wasn't as clever as he thought he was, so would often get into trouble with police. Story 17. Worked in a restaurant at hotel chain management, regularly found meaningless reasons to suspend various employees or cut hours. This one guy had been there almost 13 years. Clients loved him, staff appreciated his presence, and he often came to the rescue of anyone requiring help. Everyone could depend on him, and he supported everyone. He had, like everyone in a restaurant, bumped heads with management now and again. Like everyone, on one particular season, they decided they were going to groom him in the eventuality to take on more responsibility. His position would eliminate his right to tips, but it came with insurance, a retirement plan, and steady pay. He had kids, was in his mid-40s. It all made sense why someone would take that job. He would, however, no longer be in the union. Fast forward to the day after his training is complete, the guy comes in with his management uniform and all. Some waiter calls in sick, and instead of him calling in another employee, he decides he was going to handle a few tables and the management responsibilities. At the end of the shift, the hotel manager summons the guy into his office like the boss of his boss. They fired him straight away. He was escorted out of the building, and our boss said there was strict rules in management. Working tables harmed the hotel's image. It was complete BS. He had maybe taken 2 tables and split the rest amongst the rest of the staff. Everyone basically agreed. They promoted him just to get him out of the union to be able to fire him. A number of employees left shortly after for other various reasons. It was a sort of shaking up the queue, and anyone who wouldn't fall in line would be shown the door. Today, that restaurant no longer exists. They closed down maybe 2 years later, rebranded the restaurant from American Steakhouse to Italian French Dining. New cooks, new waiters, new management. It was just sort of the catalyst or the first domino. Story 18. Not me. but a story from when I worked at Disneyland a long time ago in attractions rides. The area manager loved this one particular cast member employee like this was the son he never had. This CM was promoted to lead on one of the roller coasters fairly quickly in his regime. One night, he was the lead on the closing crew, and the crew decided to ride after hours. Idiots that they are, they went without the lap bars down, and on one turn the ride is visible from the walkway. Even though the park was closed to guests, security was still in the park, and a security guard saw the train go by with the CMs standing up through the turn. Security gets a hold of theme park one, the manager in charge of the park for the night, who calls attractions one to find out what's going on. Not surprisingly, every CM who was on the closing crew that night was fired. Unfortunately, so was the prodigal son, because he was the one who dispatched the train without the lap bars down. Story 19, amazing worker, but he just couldn't help fishing off the company pier. He had a relationship with a girl from accounting, but then they broke it off and she got bitter and started complaining about him daily, claiming harassment. Unsafe workplace, yada yada. They let him go because of the threats of possible legal actions. Do not use your workplace to find girls. It doesn't work out well. Story 20 was one of my best. Was being reclassified into a salary position with raise. HR reviewed his original application, and it said he had completed college. HR verbally asked him no research done, and he said, no, I haven't, wasn't required for role, NBD. Writing it down, big deal. Gave him almost to the point of coaching him to say it every chance to say whoops. Made a mistake, he didn't, he cowboyed up and said I lied on my application. I'm fully sure they would have let him go back to work with just a note in his file. Totally survivable, super big Fortune 10 company. No option. Fired him immediately for falsifying his application. HR person was in tears. I did my best to help him find his next job. Story 21, managed a grocery store in the Midwest in the early 2000s. Had a great night stock guy, well called Juan. Because that was his name, I got to know him a little bit since I occasionally have to stay and help the night crew stock since they were frequently understaffed. Juan was from Mexico, lived in a tiny apartment with his extended family, parents, siblings, an aunt, uncle, few cousins, and a baby nephew and niece, and he worked 2 jobs full-time. So for 8 hours a night, he'd throw stock for me, then go work at a restaurant as a cook for 8 hours afterward, then go home and nap for as long as possible before repeating all over again. I had nothing but respect for Juan. He was my second best worker on night stock, always showed up on time, his output was quick and steady, and the man was scrupulously honest. One night he wanted a soda, but we had already closed the store registers, so I told him to just get one out of the display case and pay for it later. He kept the receipt for 3 weeks until I saw him again and made sure he showed it to me because he wanted me to know he did, in fact, pay for it. Anyway, after a few months on night stock, he asked me if we have any positions available during our open hours because he missed being able to see his family and wanted a more normal schedule. We needed an extra person in the meat department, so I asked him if he would be interested in that. He said he would, so I had him sit down with the butcher for an interview. The butcher liked him, so we transferred Juan to the meat department. He did very well there, and the hours allowed him some more freedom, so it seemed like a great arrangement. Hey race, where it goes bad, this was about a year after 9/11, so the new Homeland Security Patriot Act laws were being enacted fast and furious. One side effect of this was background checks, and the like were being conducted by everyone, so there was a backlog of requests. I get a notice from SSA that Juan's SS wasn't valid. No big deal. Someone probably put a number in wrong somewhere. I call our HR and read the number he put on his application. No errors. I go and find Juan and double check it. As I thought, one number was off. I send it back to HR. A week later, I get a call from the HR director. She conferences in the regional AP guy. Apparently, Juan is not a citizen of our country. We need to terminate him immediately. I call Juan up to the office and let him know he's being let go. He's upset, but nods his head and leaves. He comes in a week later to pick up his last check, but there's no check for him. I call HR and find out that since he's not a legal citizen, we're withholding his pay until we hear back from INS. I have to tell him this as well. I don't know what happened to him after that. We did eventually pay him for his last week of work, but we ended up not paying out any of his vacation time, of which he had a fair amount, because of reasons I'm not very clear on. TLDR, best employee was undocumented. Had to let him go once corporate HR found out. Story 22, as the employee, with a manager who clearly didn't want to fire me. It was because I was not going to join the owner's Scientology activities. At the firing interview, the owner's stooge, fellow Scientologist, and son-in-law tried for 20 minutes to come up with reasons I was personally responsible for getting fired. Every reason he floated for my bad performance was shot down by my own direct manager, whom ID invited into the meeting as I suspected what it was. And get that, they weren't going to invite him to a meeting where his own direct manager was being dismissed. It was all shady AF. Stuff like stooge CEO, well, I see here that you have a lot of unfinished tasks. Direct manager, no. Actually, everything on his to-do list is complete, which, by the way, is why I thought I might be getting fired. ID never had a clear to-do list. It went on like that, until McStooge ran out of ideas. After all that, the stooge then said, well, the industry is on a downturn, so we're downsizing and laying you off. Upside left in excellent financial condition, took a year off to complete a major goal in the martial art ID been studying, went to Japan and achieved the goal, and now I'm being courted by terrific companies with interesting and challenging work, none of which are owned by Scientologists. See, when you complain that a tiny company gives the entirety of its operational and expansion budget, about $1 million at the time, to Scientology, and thus suddenly can't pay people, it appears that that is called an industry downturn. Story 23, over 20 years of management experience. I've had to fire several great employees. The main reason is because they upset the herd. They show up. Most other employees are negatively affected by their presence. They complain too much, exceed boundaries, gossip, instigate, or whatever. They know they're good at bulletproof. They'll usually pull them aside, give them a warning. You know they're good, they care, but if they don't quit upsetting the herd, they will soon be gone. Story 24, I work at a store where we have to ask for donations for the charity we support at every transaction. We're in competition with the other stores in the chain, and whichever store has the highest percentage of donations after 3 months get a bonus. Every employee, cashier or not, gets 100. Well, one of my assistant managers was awesome. Always had the highest percent of donations per transactions and highest dollar amount. She always did a great job in all other aspects of the job as well. Well, it turns out she was offering every customer her employee discount if they donated. So if someone spent $500 and she gave them 30 off, they wouldn't at all mind donating 10 to 20 per transaction. Well, it came back from corporate what she was doing, and we had to let her go. Story 25, out of high school, I got a job at Arby's. And there was a guy who pretty efficient at drive-through and could run it by himself during lunch rush if he had to. Turns out during slow hours, he was skimming money by deleting orders after taking the money instead of completing the transaction. Managers estimated he did it for 3 to 6 months without getting caught and took upwards of $2,000 to $3,000. They never pressed charges cause he confessed. Ed had almost forgot he signed for the package and stole our team's Christmas bonus Walmart gift cards that were $25 each. Story 26, this happened to me. I was told by the owner that I was the best salesperson. Then I texted a friend calling the owner, and he was very rude to my fiancée. General manager, who hated my guts, asked the friend what happened. She then went and whined to the owner, Erwin Ackerman, said, you should fire her. So he did. TLDR, I got fired for calling the owner via text. Story 27, not me, but coworker, and I eventually, after he was fired, got promoted to what would have been his boss. But anyway, I worked overnight shifts for a server room at a university, outside our supervisors. We were all student workers. This guy was pretty much the definition of overachieving kiss. Not really just did whatever he could to look good to whoever he could. He was also very good at his job, was pretty much on a definite path to full-time employment, had he not upped supremely. One weekend, started Saturday morning, we had a cooling crisis. The AC units malfunctioned, server room got super hot, and we turned off all redundant equipment to keep the temperatures as low as we could until we got the AC back to full capacity. These servers were intended to stay off until we knew we were in the clear. Under no one's authority but his own, on Sunday night, he went into the room and started turning things back on. Ultimately, this caused no real problems, but he ended up being made an example of because this was a massive violation of policy, and if the cooling hadn't held up, he may have damaged equipment or even worse. My boss tried to find out for him, but ultimately, they let him go because he pissed off both our server teams. Story 28, I had an employee that was, by a very large margin, doing more work than everyone. Unfortunately, the amount of grief and anger he left in his wake was extraordinary. He was short with our customers, rude to his peers, homophobic, and slightly racist, but never quite enough to do anything concrete. In the end, I let him go because the damage to the team wasn't worth his additional output. So best employee is maybe a misnomer, but there you go. Story 29, dude. We know the trick of taking store merchandise out with the trash, then coming back later and picking it up. We're hip to that. We check for it. We check for it all the time. I like you and all, but it isn't going to work. God damn it, I didn't want to, but that's why I fired you. That's why you left the store in handcuffs, and that's why 2 days later, I testified against you in court. Story 30, we had a field tech that was awesome. Probably the best I've ever seen or heard of. He was knowledgeable, skilled, and personable. He was always early, worked great under stress when things went south, and often finished jobs early. If we had off-hour issues, he was always available, and it seemed like he was in his truck and ready to get going right away. Well, it turns out that he was always in his truck and ready to go. He had been living in his company truck for some time and just pulled off the side of the road each night at a utility pole, climbed up, stole some cable TV, and set up shop for the night. We found that out and had to let him go, also the cocaine and the meth. Story 31, not me. But I happened to someone I worked with, very sweet lady, very nice, couple of young kids, always a good hard worker, and very motivated for a cashier. Well, we had a POS system that printed coupons for people based on what they bought after the transaction, to be given with the receipt. She would ask people if they wanted them, and if they said no, she would pocket the one she knew she would use. Loss prevention made an example of her. I mean, I get why they didn't want people doing that, but it was a new system at the time. They didn't have rules against it. Story 32, I didn't have to do the firing, but for whatever reason, my colleague had it in for this mid-level supervisor. She was a great trainer, did everything she was asked, took initiative, and then some. She was always worth well more than what she earned, and had an absolute passion for the work. We worked with kids with autism. After a few months of having some vendetta against her, my colleague wrote her up, literally for being away from her desk too often. Her uncle had recently been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and she was the only relative in town who could care for him. So the time she was away from her desk, she was stepping out to cry when she felt overwhelmed and didn't want people to see her cry. I found out after she was let go for this that she had informed the supervisors of this when her uncle was diagnosed, and that she was feeling very emotional about it, and may need to take days off, take more frequent breaks to gather herself again and remain productive. Instead of showing compassion, my colleague used this as an opportunity to terminate her despite having no other red flags, feedback, or performance issues. There was simply a personality difference, and she didn't gossip with the other supervisors. And this was all done with our other colleagues and supervisors' blessings. I don't work for this company after I found out about this. Story 33, semi-relevant, that happened to me. I wasn't the best employee, but I also wasn't the worst. ID say 23 best out of 15. Lots of goobers working in that warehouse. I was young, 18, 19, working in a third-party car parts warehouse. What we'd do is sell those parts to auto body shops so they can fix body damage to cars. So we stocked everything on the outside of car trucks: fenders, hoods, bumpers, lights, door handles, etc. My job was to unload the C-cans from Korea we'd receive 3 times a week, add them into the inventory, tag them with the barcodes for our stocking system, and put them on the shelves without interrupting the guys doing the picking, filling out orders for the various car shops we supplied. I was at this ID empty a C-can in one day to allow for the next shipment to come in. The following day would be a rush to put everything away and start unloading the next shipment. My method created a mess in my area as we unloaded faster than we could put the parts away, but it was organized and I never failed to report missing stock or excess stock. All the while, the only time we had to pay fees for a container was the time someone unplugged the water pump for the loading bay, which flooded and subsequently froze. I was never told about the water pump. I didn't know where the plug was, otherwise I'd have made sure it was always plugged in. I still ate for it. The owner loved how efficient we were. I'd been there 11 months when I was let go. At 12 months, I was entitled to a 1-pay raise, putting me at 150 above min wage, and instead of doing that, he put the guy head just hired that ID just trained in charge of unloading and fired me to save 150 an hour. The owner was a gigantic. ID heard the rumors about him, but thought it was just typical my boss isn't shop talk. Nope, he was legit a cheap, lazy, gigantic asshat. Story 34, hardest working guy I knew. He would always come in early and pick up a shift if someone called in, and willing to learn everything. Turns out he stops in on his day off to get a slice of pizza, but he's drunk as not a big deal in and of itself, but we were really busy and his work ethic took over. This guy, again drunk as, gets behind the counter in a wife beater and starts trying to help customers. We asked him politely to leave, but he just wanted to help so bad that he got really upset and caused a scene. Had to let him go for that. Super sad because it turns out he has a bad drinking problem. Story 35 was working for a rental company, and the top seller got fired after getting into it with the regional GM. I was good friends with him, the seller, not the GM, and so the GM was out for my blood. I kept records and was careful, but sure enough, I got hauled into the manager's office with the GM there to fire me. I asked for cause, and he gave a bunch of flimsy about my work and how I didn't complete the sales reports properly. I responded calmly each time, showed him the paperwork. His response: I don't care that you have an answer for everything. You're a friend with ex-employee, so you were fired. My manager, after the GM left, came to my desk and apologized. Gave me a great reference letter. So now, their top 2 salespeople were gone, had a job that afternoon.